My Son Hunter is a comedy drama from 2022 that aims to lay out the complicated case against President Joe Biden and his son for their alleged high crimes and misdemeanors undertaken throughout the Obama administration, during which Joe served as vice president. Those crimes being a complicated web of business dealings in Ukraine and China, which allege favorable foreign policy and national security decision-making by the United States in exchange for large sums of money that were directed through Hunter's vague business and consulting services.
Look, here's the deal. I can remember getting paid some money, but I can't remember what for. I can't remember what we did with it.
Consulting.
Yeah, consulting.
While it might be tempting to cast this film off as a bizarre oddity, the fact of the matter is that these accusations seemingly have legs and have resulted in a real-life impeachment inquiry by House Republicans. This may seem like an extreme measure to take without much in the way of hard evidence and relying a lot of conjecture. A film like this could serve as a valuable purpose to explain these crimes to the broader population, or at least fill in the gaps to make this decision more justified and popular. But despite the seemingly interesting subject matter and relevant context, the movie itself is just so incredibly boring and stupid. It's also completely incomprehensible for anyone who isn't already deep in the weeds of these theories already, or has an encyclopedic knowledge of Hunter Biden's personal life. For those who aren't already familiar with conservative media circles in the information space of the Republican Party, a lot of these accusations being made against Biden might seem complicated and difficult to follow, and they are. It also paints Joe Biden as a cartoonishly corrupt and skeevy civil servant who's only interested in getting elected, making money, and sexually assaulting his security guard. Hunter is portrayed as a drug-addicted loser who can't do anything without smoking a crack pipe, but then also somehow manages to orchestrate a series of high-profile business dealings with important decision-makers from foreign governments around the world. It's very ridiculous and over the top, even for a media space that so routinely denounces nuance when it comes to most issues. But while the characterizations of these real people may be questionable, the real failure of the film is a complete lack of coherence and inability to mount a strong case against the sitting president. In fact, the case is so badly made that these accusations are just so absurd that I can't imagine anyone being convinced of Joe Biden's crimes after sitting through this thing. My Son Hunter barely has much of a plot to explore these complex accusations. We're introduced to him getting stoned in a strip club somewhere, meeting a woman called Kitty, and passing out in his hotel room before having a lengthy conversation with his dad in his motorcade. That's all that happens in terms of actual story, but to pad out the runtime and allow these conspiracy theories to make sense, the film will constantly break the fourth wall and flash backwards in time to show Hunter and his dad making these deals or dramatize how these conversations played out with Ukraine and Chinese policymakers and businessmen. It's clearly heavily inspired by the likes of Adam McKay movies, like Vice or The Big Short, which also constantly cut away from the main stories to deliver comedy exposition dumps to the audience, in an effort to bring home a political message, usually in an exasperated way to convey the ridiculousness of the situation and the incredulousness of these people and how they managed to get away with it all. But The Big Short and Vice had compelling characters to drive the narrative and buy audience investment in the story. We're delighted and repulsed by the actions of these characters, which reflects on us as viewers and can bring an element of sympathy to the decisions that they make and the consequences of their actions. My Son Hunter can't help itself by being so disgusted with its central figures that there's none of that. In fact, it works in the opposite way. We can see the actor portraying Hunter to try and make his character at least somewhat sympathetic by being driven to please his father and being too coke-addled to make decisions on his own. He's not an opportunistic, sleazy businessman, which would make sense in the context of his actions. He's just too sad and pathetic to make any of these claims actually believable. In fact, a lot of these details won't make sense unless you're already deeply familiar with Hunter's personal life, which the film checks off like an old band playing reliable hits to the crowd. Like the time he apparently had sex with his dead brother's wife, or when he got a stripper pregnant. It also pokes fun at his art projects, which are so routinely mocked by conservative news figures as a corrupt scam to launder money. But most of the mockery comes from his choice of leisure, which is mostly just getting high and sleeping around and taking risque photos of his sleazy parties and orgies with various women. A lot of these were shown to the world when his laptop was compromised and the contents of his personal life were aired out for the world to see. The film, of course, does not have much to say about these apart from pointing and laughing at him, but it makes a lot of the central claims in its case even more incredulousness. We're actually supposed to believe that this large fail-son was able to link up with high-powered Chinese businessmen and make complex foreign policy and national security deals? Really? This guy? He was so influential in the American government and was able to make policy concessions, then funnel the money through his offshore business holdings? Are you serious? Joe Biden, too, is just another level when it comes to a sleazy portrayal that well crosses the line into the absurd. He's also framed as a violent criminal mastermind, pulling the strings on Hunter to get these deals across the line while also just being a horny, gross old man who has no idea what's going on, is confused about general things, and gropes his bodyguard, or really anyone else that just happens to be in the room. And while these characterizations of its central figures are all over the place, the case being made against Joe Biden isn't much better. My Son Hunter offers 3 distinct theories, working dependently with each other to describe a much more complex set of accusations sincerely believed in large parts of the United States.
Hunter's been using his father's name to make deals with foreign government-connected businesses. Joe gets a percentage cut of the deals, and he influences foreign policy decisions in favor of those companies and governments.
These are that first, Hunter made business dealings around the world, promising favorable American foreign policy and national security decisions in exchange for large sums of money. Second, that Joe Biden, as vice president in the Obama administration, single-handedly was able to enact these decisions as part of a broader American geopolitical strategy. And third, that mainstream media and social media tech companies worked in tandem to cover up all of this and influence the 2020 election to bring Democrats into power. I don't want to get too into the weeds of the actual politics of all this, but to be fair to the producers, and even though the film does a terrible job at laying all this out, there does seem to be some legitimacy with the first accusation being made. It's true that Hunter Biden profited enormously while his father was vice president, and at least he did try to imply that he could get his father to employ some favorable decision-making in exchange for money.
You mean vice president?
No, come on, man. The big guy.
Big guy.
And yes, the film's way of conveying this is about as blunt as a shovel to the face, but this is one of the few areas where there does seem to be actual evidence supporting the accusations. The problem is that the second and third theories make absolutely no sense, and lack any concrete evidence to back them up currently. The lack of evidence is obvious given the lengths the film goes to in explaining how all this probably happened. A central claim is that the Obama administration sent Ukraine billions of dollars of defense spending only due to a deal being made between Hunter and some corrupt figures in the Ukraine. American foreign policy is a complex issue to try and get into in an otherwise short video essay on a terrible movie, but suffice to say that the vice president's specific powers when it comes to making these decisions can be pretty limited. The United States has several large agencies, all of which have different agendas and objectives when it comes to dealing with other nations. The Pentagon's decision to arm Ukraine was in large part due to Russian encroachment in the region. In the aftermath of the invasion into Georgia in 2008 and the lead up to the annexation of Crimea in 2014. There's also the claim that the trade policy decisions made in the Obama administration in China was due to the fact that Hunter Biden singularly crafted these to happen, and accuses him personally of selling out state secrets and information on nuclear weapons in exchange for cash. But this was all in an era where American foreign policy was shifting focus. The Obama years could be characterized as a time of rapprochement with China in exchange for tighter focus being placed on NATO and Eastern Europe. In fact, arming Ukraine and the recognition of Russia as a principal geopolitical threat was a policy that Republican President Donald Trump extended well into his term. So it's pretty ridiculous to think that these decisions could even be made solely by the vice president, no matter who happened to hold the position at the time. But not that the film would care or understand about any of that. And this is a pattern that extends into all areas of the accusations it tries to explain to the audience, using a shred of real-life evidence, like the existence of a laptop held by the FBI, and using it to imply proof that these business dealings across the 2010s was an elaborate cover-up orchestrated by the executive branch. If you actually watched the movie itself, you'd find the sections on Ukraine and China as the most difficult to follow, because this is where the filmmakers lack any of the concrete evidence they need and have any sort of explanation of what happened.
Okay, maybe it didn't happen exactly like this, but metaphorically speaking.
They just had to go with their assumptions, and this results in a speedrun approach to hit all of them as fast as they can within the same series of scenes. It's chaotic and it makes no sense, but it doesn't matter as long as you're on their side. The third accusation, that social media companies tried to suppress this information on these issues to get Democrats into power, is also oversimplistic explanation for an otherwise complicated set of interrelated issues.
Can't seem to find anything but positive stuff on the Bidens.
That's because you're using Google and the mainstream media.
I think a lot of this can be explained by the lingering grievances the filmmakers and larger conservative news media has with the lack of attention being made on these accusations, and the assumption that this is not being due to a lack of evidence, but it must be a conspiracy theory. The film ends by showing its hand and veering into parody. It portrays an ideal world in which these crimes are finally broken by the media and the general public finally turns against the Bidens, as both of them are shuffled off to prison. In glorious fashion, this leads to a different result in the 2020 presidential election, not one where violent rioters stormed the Capitol and beat cops to death, but instead where Donald Trump wins re-election and everything is good and right in the world.
Yes!
It's far too silly to be taken seriously, and yet here we are dealing with the consequences. So does any of this matter? Can't we just blow this off as a weird oddity made by otherwise passionate but pretty delusional filmmakers? It would be pretty tempting, and I would always be inclined to give creatives the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, this can't be the case. There are many people in the United States and sitting in the Republican House that are ready to ride and die to arrest the Bidens. In September 2023, then Republican Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy opened up an impeachment inquiry, largely due to pressures from select members of his party that have completely bought into these theories and are convinced that Joe Biden has sold the United States out for personal gain and are now hell-bent on an impeachment no matter what the facts bring. It's unclear what the results of this inquiries will be and whether it'll lead to a full impeachment. General polling as of now suggests that Americans are curious and willing to have the investigation, but aren't so sure about the crimes themselves. And it's why this film was made in the first place. But while a movie like this may be intended to serve as edutainment for the masses to gin up excitement and fervor around the impeachment, I think this film may have the opposite effect, making people even more confused and skeptical about what's going on. So while My Son Hunter is a silly little movie that swings for the fences and tries to mount a convincing case against the president, it falls short pretty spectacularly. The seriousness of these claims alone deserves so much more than what we're being given. The very idea of a sitting vice president offering to sell out the role of a civil servant in exchange for cash are treasonous, and we should take any alleged crime of the sort with respect and an open mind. But it's just so hard when the filmmakers can't even get the basics right, and hand-wave significant moments with so much reckless abandon. It's far more interested in creating a cartoonish portrayal of the Bidens and dreaming of a world that aligns with their political interests. The claims themselves don't even matter as long as the audience hate Bidens as much as they do. We shouldn't be so careless when it comes to making accusations like this, but unfortunately many people in the United States just don't see it like that. Overall, the film would rather just play the victim. It lives in a world where the general public are being duped and having the wool pulled over their eyes for not seeing the Bidens as they really are. It's sad because we could have had something much more real and important and worth looking into. My Son Hunter doesn't make a compelling case against the president, and given its focus into other areas of the Bidens, I don't think it even really wanted to. Like most sitting Republicans, it's far more interested in grandstanding and living in an alternate reality. So thanks everyone for watching. I am blown away by the response I'm getting, and I'm really grateful for the comments and the feedback that are engaging with what I have to say and my perspective. I love it. Even if the comments I don't completely agree with, I do enjoy hearing what you have to say. So keep it up, I look forward to reading more. As always, be sure to like and subscribe to support what I'm doing, and let me know if there's any other films you think I'd be interested in covering. I'll see you guys in the next one.